So as you're able to see, you got people coming to the United States from literally every corner of the globe. We talked about who arrived where, but now let's take a look at what life was like when they actually arrived. Now this is going to start from literally the moment they left whatever homes they had and began the travel to get to the United States. Now today, you think about it, you have a great number of choices when it comes to travel, by land, by sea, by air. This was a point in time, however, you got to remember there's only one way you could get to the U.S. From either Europe or Asia or the Caribbean and things like that, and that was by ship. If you were really dedicated and you wanted to come to the U.S. from somewhere like, say, South America or whatnot, I mean, you could literally walk the whole way, but generally speaking, most of these folks are going to arrive via steamship. Now, these are ocean-going vessels. They are not, don't think of them in terms of like the cruise ships of today. These are not luxury liners. In some cases, these are not ships that were even, really their primary goal was to carry passengers, but they were to carry freight, but did have the ability to sort of shoehorn in people and take on passengers, from time to time. So a great number of these immigrants are going to arrive on American shores via steamships, as I said. Now, the thing about these is that the people who were actually making the journey, they had to share very cramped and pretty unsanitary space. Like I said, these are not luxury ships. Okay, so you have a sizable number of people put into a very small area. Okay, you think about a typical classroom. Okay, normally you have, say, 30 students in there. Theoretically, you could pack in a whole bunch more than that if you wanted to really, just try and pack the room full of people. Same kind of thing is going on here. If a ship was taking on passengers, then the more passengers that it actually took on board, the more money the ship would make. So it was in their interest to go through and get as many people as possible. But you have to take into account sleeping conditions were not fantastic. You pretty much, some folks did have cabins and they did have beds and things like that, but for the most part, you were kind of on your own to figure out where you're going to sleep. Plus, two, think about bathrooms. Okay, you go through and you have dozens of people with only one bathroom to share. That's going to run into problems rather quickly. Plus, this is going to be a trip of quite some time. We're talking days worth of passage, and you don't have luxuries like, say, showers and things like that. So you're going to be trapped essentially in this very small, less than sanitary space. And as a result, you put a bunch of people together in a very small crowded space like that, you're going to get the spread of disease. Okay, some died en route. You have people who would get on these ships. In some cases, they've never been in this close quarters with anybody. And simple things like measles, for example, could run rampant through all of the folks that were there because of these cramped quarters. We see this, for example, back in the Civil War, where you have guys who were used to living on farms and whatnot now thrown together in close quarters with other people, and disease can run rampant. And that's what was happening in some cases on these ships. These cramped, unsanitary conditions sometimes led to illness and even death. If you died en route, oftentimes you were buried at sea, where they just basically dumped the body over the side and that was it. So it was a challenging route just to get to the shores of the United States. Okay, you had to leave your home, you had to leave family, you had to leave everything you'd ever known. You're getting on this little cramped, dirty boat, and you're hoping that you're going to make it to the United States. Thing is, you may get all the way to the shores of the United States and still not actually arrive. Now, we mentioned this before. Most Europeans that came to the United States at this time arrived in New York City. Now, there were people arriving all up and down the East Coast from Europe, but the predominant city where they arrive is going to be New York. You're going to find that New York was really one of the great melting pots of this time, where you had individuals from all over the world arriving in a relatively short period of time. Now, As they arrived in New York City, they had to pass through a place called Ellis Island. It was an immigration station. That's a picture of it. It is today a National Historic Site, so if you're ever in New York, you can actually go visit it. They had to pass through this immigration station for a variety of reasons. They had to go through and have something along the lines of a background check. Remember, this is the 1800s, so there wasn't the same communication and things like that that we have today. So as a result, they were trying to prevent, mass murderers or anything from, coming in. Did they get, were mistakes made? Absolutely. But they were going through trying to check on people, trying to do a health and safety inspection, things along those lines. Got to remember, this is a point in time. We just talked about the fact that people could get ill on these ships coming over. One of the big issues at the time was tuberculosis. Now, tuberculosis is a communicable disease. You cough, you cough up blood, your lungs get scarred, it can kill you. I mean, it's nasty, and it's very contagious. And so that was one of the things they were looking for. If you had some really serious health problems, sometimes, more often than not, you got sent back. You could have spent your life savings, you could have done everything possible to arrive in America and actually set foot on the shores of America, only to be sent back for a variety of reasons. Biggest one here is going to be health problems. So there were those who would arrive. Some of them may have some health problems. They could be put in a quarantine for a period of time. But generally speaking, a lot of folks on the East Coast arrived and went through the doors here at Ellis Island. I've read that there are literally millions of Americans today who can trace at least one ancestor back to Ellis Island. Now that was the coast. Now we mentioned before that the West Coast a little bit different, okay? Now Asian immigrants arriving on the West Coast went here through a place called Angel Island. Now this is actually Angel Island in San Francisco Bay. It's actually the larger island north of Alcatraz. And so people arriving from Asia, they would go through here. Now again, individuals arriving from Asia went all up and down the West Coast as well, Los Angeles to Seattle. But in San Francisco, this was probably the big equivalent of Ellis Island for the West Coast. Now the process on Angel Island was a lot more difficult than Ellis Island. There were more restrictions on the number of people who could come in. There were longer wait times. There was a more involved process before people could actually, go on to wherever their final destination would be within the West Coast. So Ellis Island, or Angel Island, this is now a state park. You can actually go there. It requires a ferry to get you out there. There's no bridge or anything. So it's like going to Alcatraz. You got to get on a boat, but at the same time, it is something you can go, you can check out, and you can actually, walk around the same island. So both coasts had immigration stations. It wasn't just, for the most part, you just arrived and all was done. They were trying to have some kind of organization to all of this so that, it would be a little more controlled. Now, getting along in a new culture with a brand new language is at the very least a challenge. Now, I said before, in light of full disclosure to you guys, my wife is originally from Mexico. She was born and raised in Mexico City. When she moved here as a 7th grader, she did not speak English. She actually learned as she in school in Turlock. And so it can be a massive challenge. You think about, you go anywhere in the world, if you don't speak the language, if you're not used to the culture, it's going to be a challenge. Especially, you think about it, if you have packed up everything and you have moved to the United States, for example, this is it. You are now here. It's not going to be that easy to do, pack up and head back home. So you have the challenge of language and culture. And so what tended to happen at this point in time was a number of immigrants settled in communities with other immigrants from the same country. That's why you end up in places like New York and whatnot, where you do have areas called Little Italy, or in San Francisco, Chinatown. The idea being that if you are around individuals who share a more common background, and share a language and a culture and whatnot, it's going to help you feel more at home. It's going to allow you to feel a little more secure in the decision that you've made, that you're not in this alone. And as immigrants did arrive on both coasts, they're going to form these little communities, often within larger cities. And it's going to benefit them. They are going to go through, they're going to have neighbors with a similar story and what have you, so they're able to acclimate to the new place a little more readily. It didn't just make them feel at home, it also helped them to organize or form organizations to help one another. Okay, this is sort of what could be referred to as a mutual aid society, that you've got people working together to try and help one another out. Like I said, if you're going somewhere, if you move somewhere where the language, the culture, and everything is totally different from everything you have ever known, you're going to need some help. You're going to need some assistance. This was a point in time where really it was a lot easier for people to help one another. They didn't anticipate the government helping them get things done. They pretty much had to work on it on their own. And these mutual aid societies would benefit not just the individuals, but it eventually would go on to aid the greater